Hi everyone, I'm Susan Birch and welcome back to the first Health Detective podcast episode for 2023. So delighted to be back with you all. And I'm really delighted to introduce you to Neil Cannon. And I think this is going to be an amazing first episode because we're going to touch on all sorts of things about health and the root cause and his book, The Vitality Secret. So Neil, welcome from Mexico.
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast and an honor. I'm excited too for this chat, just based on our brief conversation beforehand. I don't know which way this is going to go, but I think it's going to be an exciting conversation.
Well, we'll just chat about things and chat about health and see what comes up. Before we start doing that, can you just tell us a little bit about your own health journey and what you got into this? So you shared a little bit with me before we started, and I'm sure everybody would love to hear more about that.
Yes, absolutely. So as I'm sure you're aware, most people, if not everyone I know who works in holistic health comes with their own story of recovery or healing, or they know someone close to them who's been on quite a journey of recovery. And I'm one of those people. I come with my own story of healing, and it was actually my father who was my wake-up call in a roundabout way. So I had pretty bad eczema from a toddler, and for the best part of 30 years, I was given steroid creams, which have left pigmentation on my skin, and prescription moisturizers, which contain pretty harmful ingredients, and antibiotics when it got really bad. And we all know that when we have too many prescriptions of those, it can really cause a lot of harm in the gut and cause harm to the very organ we want to heal when it comes to skin conditions. So that was pretty much the protocol for 30 years. And it wasn't until my father suffered a stroke when I started to really understand its underlying cause. And I had this kind of inner knowing when he had this stroke, that his stroke was avoidable. I'd already written a book in health and fitness for men, actually, for increasing testosterone naturally, as it happens. And I just remember seeing this word inflammation everywhere. And when he had this stroke, I just had this memory of him being told a few years prior to his stroke that he had chronic inflammation. I remember exactly where we were standing in the family home. And he said, I've got this chronic inflammation, apparently. His sister, my aunt, is a naturopathic doctor and has about 20 letters after her name. And she had advised him to make some changes around then. And I just remember thinking, why didn't his doctor, like his standard kind of GP, his general practice doctor in the UK, address this? And I just had this inner knowing that his stroke was avoidable. I don't know where it came from. I just thought, this whole thing doesn't make sense. And it inspired me to go on a bit of a research quest, if you will. And I started reading more books. I'd already written and read quite a few, actually, myself, or written one and read quite a few to help me write that book, and watched documentaries and listened to interviews and watched interviews with experts and doctors. And it became very clear to me very quickly that chronic inflammation was the underlying cause of the hypertension that ultimately led to a stroke, and also the asthma he's had since 12 years old, which is a fully reversible condition. And of course, the eczema I'd had since I was a toddler. So I remember seeing it being described as an inflammatory disease. And I've never thought of myself having a disease. I just thought I had this kind of symptom that wouldn't go away. Well, I guess I did think of it as a disease, but I just didn't like that term. So what I did is made some changes to my diet, my lifestyle, and very quickly my eczema went away. Now, I can't say it's cured, quote unquote, cured, because cured suggests it will never come back. Now, I see eczema as a symptom indicating to me that my body is inflamed. So if for whatever reason my body becomes inflamed, my skin can show me very quickly that it's inflamed. And then I think, okay, what's going on in my life right now? I need to make an adjustment. But for the most part, it's gone. And it's nothing like what it was when I was growing up. So I say for the most part, it's gone. And since 2015, I've been helping people reverse all kinds of symptoms by really understanding, well, that's the underlying cause. And these similar protocols, these similar approaches can be used with all of these different symptoms or illnesses, if you like, and achieve pretty extraordinary results. And that's really where I am today. And it's gone from just diet and exercise back in 2015, really focusing on anti-inflammatory diet and healing the gut and exercise and reducing stress and basic stuff, to more involved processes where we cover the physical, mental, emotional, and energetic pillars of vitality. And the idea is to address each pillar, create harmony in the body so symptoms naturally disappear. It's a long answer.
Well, I really love it. I love your 4 pillars. I think they're so important. And how about we start just briefly talking about symptoms a little bit, because I tend to think that we often class symptoms as the problem. I have migraines, I have eczema, I have gut issues, I have constipation or diarrhea or bloating. And I like what you touched on, that is a symptom, and we need to find the root cause. And then that root cause, and we all talk about inflammation and oxidative stress as if we really know what we're talking about. It's common
So
out.
true. Yeah.
Take all this stuff to reduce inflammation and all these supplements to reduce inflammation and oxidative stress without really understanding kind of the deeper mechanisms behind it and how that is the root cause. And it manifests in all these different ways in different people, depending on your personal susceptibility.
Yes. So I see illnesses, chronic illnesses or chronic dis-ease as chronic symptoms of an underlying cause, which is to be resolved. And I see symptoms like the warning light on your dashboard in the car. If the oil light comes on, the standard of care as an owner of your car would be to take it to the mechanic. So they go to the root cause, they take the engine apart, well, not to do the oil, but they get to the oil challenge. It might be just change the oil or replace something that's broken. The point is the mechanic will address the root cause, so the light will naturally stop flashing. So that would be an ideal scenario with the human body. We would go to the doctor and they would help you get to the cause, but that's not really what happens these days. What happens instead is people are prescribed a drug which really just puts out that light. It's as if you're taking your car to an electrician, so they rewire the dashboard so the light stops flashing, where the underlying cause of that light hasn't been addressed. That's how I view the conventional approach to health, or quote unquote medicine. So I think there is a better way. And if we understand symptoms as messengers from the body indicating that there's an imbalance, there's a cause creating the symptom, first of all, it empowers us. It doesn't put us into this victim state as if we've been struck down by this terrible curse. It says we can say, right, what is causing my body to go out of balance? What is causing the eczema? What is causing the asthma? What is causing the arthritis? What is causing the gout? Every chronic illness is symptomatic of an underlying cause. And I see chronic inflammation as like the midway. It's like an underlying cause, and underneath chronic inflammation are the true root causes. And then we go into toxicity and trauma, ultimately, to really get to the true causes of what's causing the body to be out of balance. And I prefer that way of healing the body to just taking symptom masking drugs, which, by the way, are amazing in emergencies. We can't take that away from the medical industry. Pharmaceutical industry is phenomenal in medical emergencies, life-saving surgeries and anesthesia, etc. It's amazing. My own parents wouldn't be alive, thanks, if it wasn't for them.
And I think we really need to acknowledge and appreciate that about medicine, and, all due respect to people who practice that kind of medicine. And that we've all had, had success with, with something or someone we know where medicine has really helped us. But what we're talking about here is health. And I'm just going to read a quote that I saw on your website, and I really liked it. And I think it's something we could all keep in mind. And that was that there is no such thing as alternate health. There is health, or there is medication. And that's what we're talking about here. You're healthy, or
you take drugs.
Yeah.
I wrote that because I was filling out a job profile I was answering a questionnaire about what I did for work, and it said alternative health, and I said, I said to myself, I don't work in alternative health. I work in health.
Yeah.
I talk about getting people off drugs, revitalizing their bodies, getting to the cause of illness, and helping people give them their lives back, or supporting them in the process. And I thought it's such a misnomer that if you go into the history, it's been around for 112 years or 113 years almost. And well, anything that wasn't Western medicine was almost made to be inferior, and they called it alternative health as they were blowing up the medical industry. So we don't need to go too much into that now, but I like to make a point. This isn't alternative medicine. This isn't alternative health. This is true health. This is just health.
And that really stepped out at me, that stood out, and I was like, oh, that's a great quote. So people can go check out your website, and we'll give them the details shortly. Before we started recording, we were talking a lot about the body's ability to heal itself, and I really would like to delve quite a bit down that pathway and also talk about trauma. Now, trauma's become, almost a fashionable word, over the last few years. And, we all have trauma. We all have, we were left in our beds to cry when we were infants, or somebody didn't attend to our needs, right up to serious trauma. And I know myself, I was viciously raped when I was 18. I understand trauma, and I'm not minimizing trauma. But so I'd like to really get into the effect that trauma does play on our health and these underlying symptoms. But before we talk about that, can we just talk a little bit about genetics and health and epigenetics? Because so many people feel that they are a victim of their genes, and they're often told by, their GPs and the medical establishment that you have type 2 diabetes because it's genetic. So there's not much you can do about it. Or you have this or that, I do have the gene for Alzheimer's. So I feel, there is a genetic risk, but what I do and how I take care of myself is going to dictate whether that genetic risk is actualized or whether I avoid it. So I'd like to just hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, another empowering science is the science of epigenetics, which tells us that it's not the genes that trigger the illness. It's actually the environment in the body that signals the genes, which signals the health of our cells. So epi means above and genes are below. So genes are like the hardware, epigenetics is the software. So the epigenetics are running the hardware of the genes. So the environment is what dictates the health of our cells. So this, as you were saying, it takes us away from being a victim to our genes, as if our genes are our destiny, and it gives us our power back to say we can signal new genes in new ways depending on the environment that we keep in our body. So if you have the gene for Alzheimer's, if you were to follow suit and do exactly what that parent did, and you basically copied their way of living, or with my case, cancer and heart disease, if I do what my parents did, then there's a high likelihood that I'll develop what they had. However, the science of epigenetics tells us that it's actually more, I'm in control of that environment, and I don't have to follow suit if I don't want to. And very simplistically, that means living an anti-inflammatory life and keeping toxins for the most part out of the body and doing all of the things that we need to across all of the pillars to be in balance. So this, I feel it really gives us our power back. And this is true for the vast majority of the population. We know that more than 95% of the population, we are in control of our environment, which means we are also in control of our genes, or rather we're in control of the expression of our genes by the environment that we keep in our body. And on the same token, it means that around 5%, much less though, I believe it's much less than 5%. It's 1 or 2% of the population are born with so-called, or not so-called, they are born with defective genes, which are also termed fully penetrant, which means that we don't have the power to influence their expression. And really, if they get triggered or expressed, it's more out of our control. That's not to say that the body can't heal from it. It just means we're less in control of their expression in the first place. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I loved finding this out. And we talked about Bruce Lipton earlier. I refer to him as the father of epigenetics. He was cloning stem cells long before anyone else was, and long before it became cool. And he just describes exactly what epigenetics is, and how different environments affect the cell health and growth, and it's all of the things. So that's epigenetics in a nutshell.
So anyone wanting to follow up on that who's not familiar with Bruce Lipton's work, The Biology of Belief is fabulous, but not to take away from your own book, Neil, which is The Vitality Secret as well.
Yes, so the 26. Thank you. Yeah, the 2016 version is The Vitality Secret, and the 2023 version is The Vitality Code. And that's going much into depth across all of the different pillars.
Great. And when's your latest book out? When's that being released?
It was due to be out on the 1st of March, but that's just over 4 weeks away now. And I think that's going to be, it's going to be delayed a bit, but it's ready ultimately. It's just going through the final stages of editing.
Right. Oh, well, congratulations on that. I know.
Thank you.
It's a big job.
It's been a process.
In producing books. All right. So we've cleared up about the genetics, and that we have the ability to control what happens to our genes in the large part for most of them, and that our symptoms are really, inflammation sits at the bottom of symptoms of pretty much everything, and I think that's fairly well established. And so then we've got the root cause below the inflammation. So can we go there? How do you discover the root cause? Is that root cause going to be the same for everybody? What's the next process?
Yeah, so when I work with people, whether it's in a group setting or one-on-one, what we tend to do is start with nutrition, because food can be inflammatory. But I would like to say that whilst a lot of people can get incredible results by going on a truly anti-inflammatory diet, it's not normally diet that's the ultimate cause of the illness. Diet is, it's almost like the diet is a catalyst. It's either going to be a catalyst for deterioration of gut health and the body, or a catalyst to wellness. Everything that happens in the gut, I see the gut like the engine. What sometimes happens, for example, is someone might eat a certain food type until a certain age, and then suddenly they can't have it anymore. Or they develop something at a certain age that they didn't have before. So something's happened in their lives to trigger the symptom. And often, I would say more often than not, in fact, in the vast majority of illness, it is actually trauma that is the true cause of the illness. And I know it's been thrown around almost like it's a cool term. I often interchange it with trapped emotion. And when we understand ourselves as energy beings, we are literally energy beings. When we zoom in enough, we will see that we are 99.9 energy or empty space, and 0.001 matter. And inside this energy being that is creating this solid appearance, when our trapped emotions, when we go through life, or even in the womb, or we can even inherit them, believe it or not, as we go through life and we experience events in our lives that jolt us, it kind of throws us out of balance, throws us out of alignment. You mentioned something extremely severe that happened with you. I can't imagine that. Well, I won't even try. It doesn't have to be something that severe. It can be something more minor, like an argument with a sibling or a parent, or when you're 5 years old or 10 years old, and it's something that jolted you, and it's left this kind of energetic imprint on your life. And it's often spoken about as little T's and big T's. So like you say, we can't dwarf or minimize the severity of severe traumas. What we can do is release the energy that's associated with those memories. And there's some really great processes that we can use to do that. And you asked how we do that. One of my processes is using applied kinesiology to find out the names of the emotions, where they're stored, when they were stored, and then we can go about releasing the energy, which is like an electromagnetic bundle of energy, which can get stored in organs, in joints, lower back, head for migraines. Lower back pain is often associated with stress. So some of my clients, for example, have just released that energy, and it's almost an overnight thing, or even less. I've had a client with shoulder injury or shoulder pain for 10 years, and we've released a couple of emotions in one session, and in one session she had more flexibility in her shoulder. And it doesn't have to be difficult. And when we talk about trauma, it's often regarded that we have to go and do lots of painful talk therapy and relive the trauma, and that doesn't have to be the case. In fact, that can actually make things worse. There's a term in neuroscience that says nerve cells that fire together wire together, or neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that the more that we talk about an event in our lives, the more energy that goes to that event, because wherever we place our attention is where we place our energy. And that memory becomes more solidified in the brain and body rather than dissipates to allow us to heal ourselves. So a lot of people can do talk therapy for years and years and years and years and years, and they find themselves not getting any better, or worse, they get worse. And what I love about somatic therapy, like what I just mentioned, I use a process called the emotion code by Dr. Bradley Nelson. I always want to give credit where it's due. He's been hugely impactful in my life and on many of my clients' life. So if you're listening to this, thank you. And I introduced this process to all of my clients, and I've referenced it in my book as well, which is coming out, the next one, which is coming out. Applied kinesiology really talks about asking the body yes and no questions, and there's lots of science behind it, believe it or not. And we can get to answers very, very quickly, which can just completely cut down the time it takes to heal the body. If we know that most illness is rooted in trauma, let's find out let's find out what the traumas are, where they're stored. And it can be a really painless process. We don't have to go and talk about it and relive whatever has happened to us. So that's been a blessing. There's many ways to do it. There's many ways to release trauma. There's there's trauma release exercises, TRE, breath work, psychedelics. I've done quite a few psychedelics and done an extraordinary amount of trauma release with that help, all in a very, very sacred, contained environment, by the way, not just partying at Burning Man.
A lot of my clients, I've recommended emotional freedom techniques, which seems to really benefit them, and they find 1 or 2 sessions. And one of the things with trauma, and one of the things with society, and in New Zealand, we're real classic at this, we kind of always feel like we have to toughen up, right? And we just have to get through it, and there's a difference between accepting and moving on from something and suppressing and putting a brave face on. And that has such a different impact on how our body reacts, and our anger, and our, all our emotions. And I think our propensity towards, depression or anxiety or anger or whatever. And then that physiologically, that affects our, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So we have this HPA axis. So now we've got this adrenaline dominance going on. We have this high cortisol. And then all this leads into that root cause, all that impacts every cell. It goes back to your gut. It goes back to every cell in your body.
Yeah. Have you heard the slogan, the organs weep the tears the eyes refuse to shed?
Yeah. That's
William Osler, father of modern medicine. And everything you're saying, if we don't release this trauma, it gets stored, and it can get stored throughout our body, in organs and joints, in anywhere, and it can pose a problem. It's normally, I would say, it's the cause of addictions, it's the cause of relationship problems, it's the cause of financial problems. It's like it's the true cause of various manifestations in our lives. So some people, it will be reflected in their body's health, and then for other people, it will be reflected in their life, lives outside of their bodies. Well, nothing's outside of our bodies, but financial challenges, relationships, and anything else. So if we can get to the cause of the trauma, or if we can get to the trauma itself, release that energy. One of Dr. Joe Dispenza's sayings is, a memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. So if we can let go of that energy of whatever's happened to us, and again, this isn't trying to minimize the severity of certain things that have happened, it's releasing that energy so it is no longer a charge in the body, creating imbalances. I often refer to the way I see trauma and its effect on the body is imagine a hose pipe. Like first of all, we're wired up like a house. This is quite a big thing I'm about to drop in. We are wired up like a house with different organs on different circuits. So we are the body electric. And we can use various techniques and studies like studies of meridians and research on meridians to figure out which organs are on different circuits. And they all go through our teeth, by the way, which act like circuit breakers. And we can effectively reverse engineer why we have symptoms. And the way I see trauma is, imagine every illness is really a result of a drop in voltage to the associated organ. This is from Dr. Jerry Tennant, Healing is Voltage. He says the characteristic of all chronic illness is low voltage to an organ. And one of the main reasons why we have low voltage to an organ is because of trapped energy, trauma, or trapped emotions stored like electromagnetic energy. So imagine a hose pipe with a normal flow of water coming out of it. If you put your foot on it, you drop the flow of water going through that hose pipe. That's kind of how I see trauma in the body. It drops the flow of electrons around the body. It drops the voltage. So wouldn't it be great if you can just kind of release that blockage and ask the body its own intelligence to see where they're stored? And that's what people are doing with kinesiology and trauma release. And whichever mode of trauma release you use, that's ultimately what you're doing. You're getting rid of that energy, and that frees the body up to allow electrons to flow again and the body to heal itself, to raise the voltage, ultimately raise the frequency so the body can heal itself again.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area of work. And, what I've discovered in my research is that those emotions, that trauma, that increased cortisol, the effect that has physiologically, biochemistry on our body. So, it really uses up our minerals a lot. So we need more minerals. And you're talking about the energetic connection, which I guess in my work and my research, I look at the mitochondria, and mitochondria produces the energy for the cell. If the mitochondria cannot function properly, the cell cannot do the job that it's designed to do. So we're really talking about kind of the same principles, really.
Totally.
Yeah, just slightly different language. But I think that the way that trauma, the way that stress and anxiety and elevated cortisol, the impact that has on the mineral balance in the body, then has a huge impact on cell function, symptoms, and then up we go, up these levels to chronic disease.
So true. Mitochondria, the battery of the cell, as it's often referred to.
Yeah.
When we think of ourselves as electrically charged, everything becomes clearer. Are you familiar with Dr. Jerry Tennant?
Not a lot. I'm familiar with his name. I'll make a note because I haven't.
Yeah. I watched one of his videos maybe in 2017. I actually got EMF poisoning, meaning my cell phone had basically crashed my immune system. I can come back to that if you like. I was told that I'll quickly say, the three teeth where I used to hold my phone up here on the right-hand side of my face, the chiropractic kinesiologist was very specific, and he said these 3 teeth have become depolarized. And I looked at him like he was from outer space. I said, what the hell does that mean? And he said the polarity's flipped, these 3 teeth are attached to your immune system, and what we're going to do is use lasers, and then we're just going to put the polarity back so your immune system turns back on again. For me, it was a very I'll just say that really fast. I couldn't shake up a cold for over a month. It was a minor thing, but it was driving me nuts. I just could not shake up a cold. I was drinking vegetable juices every day, anti-inflammatory diet, in the sun, grounding all the time, yoga, working out. I couldn't be healthier, as far as I was concerned, living in LA. And I could not shake off this cold. So I went to go and see. He told me very, very quickly, within 5-10 minutes of being there. So he shined lasers on my teeth to flip the polarity back, to turn the charge so they became a net negative charge again. So all of our cells in our body have a net negative charge between -20 and -25 millivolts, to be specific. I'm going to get a bit technical for some people, but I used to be an electrician. So once I'd watched this video by Dr. Jerry Tennant, everything just kind of fell onto my lap like a giant epiphany. And I felt like at that point, 7 years of my work in holistic health had all just been summarized in a 45-minute presentation. Oh, so if we understand we're electrically charged, and if that net negative charge becomes positive, the body also becomes acidic. And if that polarity continues in that direction, it can finally go to +30 millivolts, and that's when cancer is created. So there's very specific information that happens in the body when we talk about the body electric and various illnesses.
And
I don't remember what your question was.
We're also talking about it at individual cellular level too. So, not necessarily every cell in the body, but, like with cancer, individual cells develop that acidity, and then that provides an environment for cancer growth. And yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And there's so much more that we're learning. I think the research is heading off in some absolutely incredible directions at the moment.
Totally. I love this space because of that. We're just uncovering new things all the time. And I was saying to you before the call, actually, how a friend doing the breath work that I run said to me after the breath work, he sees vanity as the gateway to consciousness. Yeah. And I thought about it for a second, and I thought, how about, I kind of agree. And I said, maybe, just maybe, sickness is the gateway to consciousness. Because once we start going down this path of, let's say, reverse engineering our illness or reverse engineering our symptoms, we start researching, and we go on this path of healing, of vitality. I talk about a vitality journey with my clients and group courses about going on a journey. And during that journey, what normally happens is we find one of these areas, we find it so fascinating, often because that's the one that's been most impactful, and then we kind of focus on that, and then all these different things kind of all these revelations start to happen about the body and what we're capable of, and how the body is able to heal anything. That's what you're saying towards the beginning, that the body really can heal anything, provided that we have the environment in the body to create healing, rather than living by the hormones of stress, for example, which create genes for disease. So we find out all this stuff as we go down the holistic path, and it just becomes a really exciting journey, and one that continues until the day we die, I'd say. And it's interesting, and it's empowering.
You sound like you go down rabbit holes in research like I do. At the moment,
I do.
At the moment, I'm going down all our cells consents light. I mean,
wow.
It just blows your mind, and it's good scientific, credible research too. It's not, it's not some woo-woo kind of fantasy, which it could sound like. So so it's certainly really exciting.
Have you stumbled across Jack Kruse then?
Yeah.
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 He's a remarkable guy. He talks about how light is the ultimate nutrient, and providing it enough sunlight, the need for food almost disappears. Fascinating research.
And Andrew Huberman too has.
Yes. Oh.
He does some great he's pretty amazing, and he does, some great stuff around light but I kind of got the whole thing about light in our eyes and circadian rhythm, but then this whole thing about individual cells exposure to light and their light censoring abilities. I'm like, oh, there's always something new that blows you away, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I just find it exciting.
Yeah, it is.
I joke. I joke with friends because there's a program in England called Gogglebox where you literally watch people watching TV. That's literally how some people spend their time. So I said you could either watch Gogglebox or you can come over to this area of this library of incredible information about what the human body is capable of and how we can create with energy and manifest with energy and heal ourselves through thought alone. And I don't know, do quantum jumping and psychic and mediumship and all these things. Or you can watch Gogglebox. It's a choice where we spend our time. And I haven't had a TV for 10 years. And if I do put the TV on, it's with there's a deliberate reason for it. And I'll put a documentary on or something. Or, sometimes I watch a film if I'm in the mood. But I'm not just going to put inane television on anymore. I just have no time for that whatsoever. I'd rather explore what, human potential and magic and all this good stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about our mind being able to heal our body. And I think that's, a great place to go. And, how do we develop a belief in that? And how do we recognize when we are switched off from that? You were talking before about, nerves that wire together, fire together. And we were talking about, if I go back to talking about being raped and I have an emotional connection to that, I relive that, I relive the feelings, the emotions, the distress. And so we want to be able to you want to be able to accept that it's happened, and then without disregarding it, look at what you've learned from it, where it's taken you, but move on. So what you were saying, earlier about wisdom, wisdom is being able to look at something like that and then not being emotionally attached. So how do we know when we're no longer emotionally attached to our thoughts, which then trigger those feelings? I know in neurochange, they say about an emotion lasts for about 90 seconds, right? So if you get angry or sad or upset about something or feel euphoric about something, that emotion lasts for 90 seconds. It's reliving the emotion. It's rethinking about it that carries on that feeling and that emotion.
Yes. So how can you tell if you've dispersed the energy? I'm hearing you ask. So, and I think you touched on it earlier. If we can, sorry,
it was a great summary of a very long question.
Yeah. I mean, I think you answered it yourself as well, because if we can talk about an event without getting triggered by it, and it's just like hey, I crossed over the road today and I spoke to this person. If it's so trivial that it doesn't trigger a response, I would say then is when you've dispersed that energy. So with PTSD, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's often referred to or associated with veterans who've been in the war, and they've seen the most awful atrocities, and it's left so much trauma in their bodies that they then have this overreactivity to life's events, whatever it is. And there's many ways to release that trauma, again, just like there is, as we were talking about earlier. And I would say for anyone who's had trauma, we know we are dispersing that energy when we're feeling more at peace with ourselves, and we are less reactive to events, less reactive to things of the same vibration. For example, if something happens which has a similar feel to it in the body, it can then trigger it again. I've done a lot of trauma release over the last recent years, and I was once told by a shaman. This is slightly amusing, and I was getting nervous a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, about going to see my family, and I was doing all this spiritual work and the Abraham Hicks and the quantum stuff and reframing events and creating new meaning for events, doing the emotional intelligence stuff like the Tony Robbins stuff and transformational program information, and really creating new meaning for all this stuff and doing such a great job. And I was nervous about going home, and he said, "Do you know what we say? You're spiritual until you see your family." And he said that because we get triggered by our family more than anyone else. And even now, I find myself getting triggered. I've just been back to England for various reasons. And I find myself catching myself going, crikey, I thought I'd release this stuff.
I'm 9 years old again.
Yeah. But what I would say, though, is Joe Dispenza calls it your refractory period. How long are we going to linger in that emotion? Because if we can catch it and then we go, hang on, let's just identify this thought, identify the emotion, be the conscious observer of the thought, the conscious observer of the emotion. And if we can just catch it and say, okay, and ride that wave, we can actually disperse it. From a spiritual teacher of mine, they said one of the best ways to release an emotion or an event or let the trauma pass is to sit in the emotion, just sit in it, and until it's dispersed. And you can almost feel it. The more kind of tuned into our bodies we are, the more that we can sense the energy. And we can, if sometimes, I think most people are familiar with gut reactions and, the nervousness, or the body kind of tensing up with some kind of, that could be a memory. So if we can become aware of that, and then we start to tune into whatever feeling it is, whatever emotion it is, and we just sit with it and allow it to pass, then we actually can transmute the energy as well. But coming back to your point, I would say, when do we know that we've dispersed that energy? First of all, if there's a symptom in your body, very, very quickly that it's gone. If there's some kind of shoulder pain or neck pain or headache or lower back pain, we know we've got rid of the energy because the symptom's gone away. If it's less obvious, if it's in an internal organ and it's the cause of a symptom of illness, then there's other ways to determine whether the emotion's gone. And then applied kinesiology can actually tell you whether you've released that emotion or not. So there's lots of ways to skin a cat, as ridiculous and horrible that expression is. There's many ways to determine whether or not we've released that emotion or a series of emotions or traumas, etc. And I think just general well-being and our reactivity to life's events is going to show us how more at peace we are. I often speak about the traffic jam example. Like two people can be sat in traffic. You could start off a journey, free-flowing traffic, unexpected traffic jam because of some kind of accident, and two people can respond in entirely different ways to exactly the same circumstance. One person can call their boss, say, hey, I'm going to be late, and they just relax in the car, listen to music, listen to a podcast, listen to your podcast, and just chill out and enjoy that time. Make it a useful time, and their body remains calm, and they're just in this situation with stationary cars. The other person can be in exactly the same situation, and they start swearing, effing and blinding, weaving in and out of effing and blinding is an English phrase, isn't it? Weaving in and out of traffic, shouting. You can virtually see veins popping out of their neck and their head, and you can virtually see the blood pressure rising in that body, and that's not a good thing. The anger starts spilling out of them like this energy that's just not very nice to be around. Ultimately, it's two people reacting in entirely different ways to exactly the same circumstance, which is ultimately stationary cars. Mm. So what's the meaning that we're giving to events is what I'm getting at. Mm. So it's the meaning, but ultimately underneath the meaning is trauma, because someone who has endured a lot of trauma in their lives tends to be more overreactive to things, whereas someone who has had less severe trauma, for example, is going to be less reactive, or someone who's released a lot of the trauma is going to be less reactive and just being more peaceful with whatever life throws at us. And life is always throwing curveballs at us for us. And I think the more that we do this work, the easier life gets, and we can tackle really challenging situations with more ease and grace and flow if we have done more of this trauma release than if we haven't done it.
And then, the person you just described who's angry and teeth is clenched and, he's effing all over the place, you can just picture his physiology and his biochemistry, and you can just picture the demand that his body has for energy and for nutrients and for those vitamins and minerals that are running the cells and having to produce the energy that he needs. And the cortisol that he's producing and the damage that constantly, chronically elevated cortisol is doing to his body. So it all comes back, to sort of some physiological, biochemical reaction, energetic reaction in the body. And we think, we were just angry, now we're over it. But that anger has this ongoing effect.
It's the fear response. It's the survival response.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just going to talk to you about the fear response. Because one thing I'd like to talk to you about is the fear response in response to being ill and in response to a cancer diagnosis, a heart disease diagnosis, some serious illness. And I see that fear response. It's natural, I'm sure we would all have a fear response. What does this mean for me? What's going to happen to me? But how would you suggest that people are able to reframe that so that that doesn't become part of continuing the symptoms, changing the body's energetic ability to heal?
Yeah, that's a really great question, this. And you might be aware there's lots more cancers in the world right now than there have been since an introduction of something, there's been many more cancers. And there's some people who will go into a fear response, and there's some people who will see it as a different thing. And a close friend of mine actually has recently had a diagnosis. He's 68, and he was recommended the standard of care, chemo, and he said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go and detoxify my body. And I spoke to him on the phone yesterday, and he's actually in my breathwork group now. And he's got stage 2 lymphoma. I won't mention his name. And he has in 2 weeks already had a massive shift, because there's a few things that are happening. One, he's already on board with what illness really is. He doesn't have the definition of cancer that most people have. Most people have this ingrained programming that cancer is this scary thing, and that people are struck down with this terrible illness which is going to take our lives. And that, I'm afraid, is a conditional, it's like a conditioned response from the mainstream media programming and all the other systems at play. And I'm almost finding myself getting triggered by this. I went on a huge investigation in 2015 because I lost 3 friends to cancer in the space of a year. And like my father, I had this inner knowing in my heart that they didn't have to die. And very, very quickly, I uncovered that cancer just is not what the mainstream tells us that it is. Just like any other illness, it's a symptom. So my friend now, who's been given this diagnosis, he doesn't think of it as this huge, scary curse. He's like, I've got a symptom in my body. It's telling me, it's communicating to me that my body is toxic in some way. So he's being the detective. I noticed you call yourself the health detective. He's starting to reverse engineer where the toxins are coming from. And he's empowered. He's done a 2-week detox. He's got color back in his eyes. He said his eyes had gone gray. He's feeling better. His third eye's opening up. And he's sensing in the space of 2 weeks. I've just got engulfed in goosebumps as I'm talking about this. And I have absolute faith that he's going to completely heal it. And he's not going to touch chemotherapy, which is derived from mustard gas in the First and Second World Wars. However, there's someone else who's also had the same diagnosis, and they're going to go straight down the conventional route. And I'm not saying it's, an evil empire. What I would say is, sometimes you can be a combination of conventional and holistic. But there's some people who they have that ingrained fear response because of however many years of programming and whatever they've seen in the media about it, and suppression of all the natural treatments that's happened for the last 112 years. And all they see is a scary diagnosis, and they think the worst because of what they've been conditioned to think. So this reminds me of a Deepak Chopra quote. He said, accept the diagnosis, not the prognosis. And this was in the Heal documentary. And well, I'm sure he said it in many different documentaries, but it's such an important point. So, okay, I've got this diagnosis, and I'm saying it like it's trivial. Absolutely, it's not trivial. And it can be really shocking once you've had that diagnosis. Someone in my family has recently had that diagnosis as well. So I'm not trying to trivialize the diagnosis. What I would like to encourage is to create new meaning for that diagnosis. Think of cancer as a symptom. It's not a disease. Think of it as a symptom. It's like that warning light in the car going off. Hey, Neil, whatever your name is, time to do a bit of detective work. Find out where the toxin's coming from, where the trauma is coming from. And really the holistic approach is physical, mental, emotional, energetic. Some people will go on an anti-inflammatory diet and they go, my cancer's not going away, but they're missing some of the major points. Mm. But coming back to your question, how can you take the fear response away? It's almost like part of my work I have seen in the last 7 or 8 years, helping people to unlearn what they have learned. Mm. When I researched my friend's cancer diagnoses, and I researched the cancer realm, it became very clear to me about the training provided to medical professionals, the training provided to doctors, and it became very clear to me that there's a narrative out there that it's just disempowering. Mm. So if we can create new meaning, some people who reverse cancer say cancer saved my life. There's a book called Radical Remission. Do you know that one? Dr. Kelly Turner, featured in the Heal documentary. She interviewed, I believe, about 1,000 people, but in this book, I think she represents about 100. And what it took for people to radically reverse advanced stages of cancer, like very metastasized cancer. And there's 9 common themes across every single one of them. And it's ultimately detoxifying the body, putting fuel back in. That's kind of simplified. It's not that easy, of course. I'm simplifying things, but ultimately finding where the toxins are coming from, dealing with the trauma, and filling the body up with all the nutrients it needs, because a lot of people are malnourished. I recently had someone on my podcast. I've got a number of interviews on my own podcast of people reversing cancer. And one of my recent podcast interviewees, I always ask them what their definition of cancer is. And she said, I'll get this right now. She said, deficiency, toxins and deficiency. That's what she said, toxins and deficiency. And then I said, would you say it's also trauma? She said, yes, toxins, trauma, and deficiency. So people to have different definitions. And then another person recently, who was diagnosed with cancer, so a more recent episode, this is quite a few years ago, he was told he had 100% chance of death if he didn't operate. And he said, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not operating. And over 4 months, he was in complete remission of the cancer. And he's sharing his story to obviously inspire others. So if I were to get that diagnosis, first of all, yes, I'd be shocked, and I wouldn't try and trivialize it, but I have been researching this space for 10 years now, and I would just encourage people to do their own research and really find out what it is. And I think turning off the mainstream media is one of the best things you can do at this point, reducing exposure to anything mainstream and just go down the route of finding out what the cause is and then creating the new meaning. Do you know about the Gerson Institute?
I have heard of it, yeah.
I heard that someone I know attended the Gerson Institute, and one of the first things they say is to their clientele is to make peace with the trauma or make peace with the cancer. And once they've done that, they then need to find appreciation for it. Like, thank you, body, for creating this symptom to tell me that my body is toxic. Mm. And it's just a whole different way of going about it, which is so much more empowering than what we have been presented with in the mainstream system. for most of our lives. And we're entering a new paradigm. You mentioned the paradigm earlier. We're totally entering a new paradigm. And I do see the old system breaking away. It's going to take its time, but I do see that happening. And I see a new paradigm opening up for us, which is about empowering us to heal ourselves, tapping back into nature, the body's ability to heal itself, and all of these superhuman powers that we can tap into once we've become more aware of what's available to us.
It's very interesting. When I was studying, when I did my master's degree, I did it in kinesiophobia around back pain, because I was kind of working in musculoskeletal rehabilitation at the time. And it was really interesting because we kind of had these pain scales and things like that. And in the intervention, which I applied, we could see that. So on pain scales, basically they say anything over 7 is really more psychological pain than actual physical pain. And people would come in and go, oh, my pain's 12 out of 10, for their back pain. And I'd drop a pen on the floor, and they'd bend over and pick it up or something, or, a 10 out of 10 pain is being tortured, a 9 out of 10 pain is childbirth, is what they say. So, so it's our relationship to that pain and how we feel. And that's where that psychosocial element of, say back pain or any other chronic pain comes in. And I do wonder about a few things about that. So one, like in New Zealand with our healthcare system, is our need. Sometimes we have to keep proving that we're sick or proving that there's something wrong so we can get the help that we need, so ACC will step in and help. So we can get into the medical system to get some diagnosis or some testing or whatever. And I wonder how much that plays into reinforcing the fear, what does this mean for us? But then when I talk about the back pain thing, which is slightly different, but I, in the process of doing my master's around back pain, I herniated one of my discs. And I can remember it was really good because it gave me a lot of empathy and it gave me a lot of huge insight. So this is where you can convert something negative that's happened into something positive. But what I can remember waking up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my goodness, am I going to be like this for the rest of my life, And then having to take control of that fear and having to go, I know better than this, kind of an interesting, fascinating topic. And if we are needing help, and if we are looking for a diagnosis and we need to go to our doctor and get our doctor to take us seriously, how do we have to reinforce how we're feeling, which then gets that neural pathway going? And, because you can't go into the doctor and go, I feel great, but, because you're not taken seriously.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things going on here, I think. Are you suggesting that symptoms people are trying to make their symptoms worse so they get listened to, or?
Yeah, but not consciously. I'm not saying people are going out faking I don't believe people are faking their symptoms, but I believe that people have to keep repeating the story and people have to try and get listened to, so they're living in that story inside their head.
Right. So almost like there's a need to be seen and heard somewhere deep within. Yeah. I think that's absolutely a common thing. There's some deeper work, I would say, for that person. There's some trauma to be dealt with and released, and there's the psychosomatic creation of illness is a real thing. We know about the placebo effect and the nocebo effect fewer people are aware of. The placebo effect proves that we can heal ourselves through thought alone. That's what's happening. And around a third of cases of randomized placebo trials, we know that it's the placebo effect that is responsible for results. In fact, it's even more than that. So depending on what the trial is. So we also know about the nocebo effect. If we know that we can heal the body through thought alone by taking an inert substance, you take a pill 3 times a day for weeks or months, whatever the frequency is, and the body heals itself because of the sheer power of belief, that is the placebo effect. That is the sheer power of the mind to heal the body. On the flip side is the nocebo effect, where we can actually create illness by becoming attached to labels and symptoms, and we can give that energy and create an illness. And when I'm working with people, for example, let's say someone has eczema, something that was my entrance into this space, one of the first things I do is say, I encourage them to disassociate from the illness, from the symptom, because of the nocebo effect. And in fact, even my friend yesterday, when I was speaking to him, who's had this cancer diagnosis, he said, my cancer. I said, please don't call it your cancer. Just think of it as a symptom you're experiencing and it's passing. So the moment you make an identity and create an identity with something, it becomes more of a thing. I'm probably not fully answering your question here, but I think there's worth paying attention or being mindful of the placebo effect and the nocebo effect. And if one really wants to heal, there's ways of doing it. There might be a deeper question: does someone really want to heal? Is there a desire to be seen and heard, or do you really want to find the solution to the problem and heal the body? Which is a deeper question, because there might be very good reason for someone to have that need to be seen and heard because they've lacked it their whole lives. So they've created an illness so they can be seen and heard, and to feel safe again because the doctor isn't getting the acknowledgement, and I'm sure they've got very good reason for that. It's just finding out what is that cycle.
Yeah, and then how and when, and do you go there, and do you raise that consciousness? And it's a fascinating area of medicine, really. I think that's going to evolve. But talking about the placebo effect, it reminds me of 2 studies I've read over the years, and I can't remember the studies exactly, but I could probably find them. So one was with an orthopedic surgeon, and so he did a study looking at the placebo effect on knee surgery. And so he had his bunch of patients, and so one lot of patients he actually did meniscal repairs or whatever it was, and then the other patients he cut them open and went through the process of doing a surgery, but didn't actually do anything to the knee. He just did the process, and both groups healed exactly the same, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And even I think it was sort of even at 18 months and 2 years follow-up, they were still equal in terms of recovery. And then I read another study about SSRIs, serotonin.
Oh yeah, antidepressants.
Yeah, and a placebo study about that, and they kind of showed that giving antidepressants over 6 weeks worked, and then it stopped working, and so they would kind of cycle it and give a placebo. So do 6 weeks, give a placebo, do another 6 weeks. And I thought that was really interesting study as well. And I can't remember all the details of that, but yeah, I think there's so much more, and there'll be so much out there that I'm not aware of in this area of research.
Yeah, I think the placebo effect is so important to know. It's empowering that we can literally heal the body through thought alone. That's what we're doing. We're through the sheer power of belief. We are signaling the body to secrete the perfect concoction of chemicals to heal the body. It's as if you've got your own pharmacy of chemicals inside the body at the absolute divine perfection, which is going to heal the body, heal the symptom, get rid of the symptom, whatever word you want to use. Isn't that amazing? Bruce Lipton talks about the brain chemist and how the brain is literally determining the chemistry, the biochemistry of the body. Mm. It is a chemist in of itself. We have a pharmacy of chemicals inside the body, stronger than any drug, and they don't come with side effects. Mm. Something that Joe Dispenza was saying in December. I was in Cancun at the advanced retreat, and he was saying advanced meditators, we have the data. He said, we have the data to show that advanced meditators are producing a pharmacy of chemicals superior to any drug. Through the meditation, they have new blood, they have new information in the blood. And he says to the scientist who's on stage or calling in on Zoom, he said, first of all, can you confirm that there's new information in the blood here? So blood carries information. It's how we determine markers for inflammation, for example, or testosterone or anti-cancer metabolites and various proteins, and it's all information. And what he's found is during these meditations, people get this new information in the blood, which is all pro-health, pro-immune system, pro-vitality, anti-cancerous. All this information is in the blood. So Dr. Joe Dispenza is saying to the scientist, can you confirm that this is here? And the scientist said, yes, it's here. And then Dr. Joe's like, well, can you now confirm where this is coming from? And the scientist said, well, focusing on nothing, apparently. And the whole room's cracking up, because that's what we're doing. We're meditating, we're focusing on nothing and downloading all of this new information into the blood. Mm. Isn't that amazing? Mm. And then our connection to this field of intelligence, whatever word you want to give it, divine intelligence, quantum field, whatever word works for you. The body is healing. People are attending his retreats and reversing the most irreversible of conditions, multiple brain tumors disappearing in a week, blind people seeing again, handicapped people walking again, deaf people hearing again, all sorts of autoimmune conditions just disappearing in days or spontaneously. I met within half an hour of arriving at the latest event in December, I'd met 2 people who are out of wheelchairs, and the person that I sat next to had reversed 9 allergies out of 11 at the last one. And I said to her, do you know, was that year when you started all these allergies, when they were triggered, was that a big year for you? Was that like trauma? Was there much trauma going on? She said, yeah, that was a huge year for me. There was so much going on. And she kind of paused and she said, no one's ever asked me that. And I said, well, in the holistic space, it's widely accepted that trauma is, or most illness is rooted in trauma. Anyway, well, the point of that, Joe Dispenza, was to talk about the power of the body to heal itself and the pharmacy of chemicals that we secrete on command, ultimately knowing about the placebo effect. And when we get connected to this field of intelligence, which can upgrade our biology, basically.
Absolutely fascinating. It's been really wonderful talking to you. So we should get back to you a little bit, because this is supposed to be like sharing what you can do, how you can help people, where people can find you.
Thank you. Yeah. So my main website is called vitalitysecret.com, and you'll have links to various social channels. Instagram is Neil Cannon Vitality. On that website, you can access my online program. I've got one for men and one for both men and women. And I do private consulting. And you can also download the book at vitalitysecret.com/book. And then you'll be notified of the next one, which will be out in a couple of months, or hopefully less than a couple of months.
Vitality Code that is coming out in a few months. Yeah, well, do you have any final thoughts you would like to share with people? We've been talking.
Maybe just
going well.
I'll just circle back to the quote that you read off near the beginning, and your body's ability to heal is greater than you have ever been allowed to believe.
I think that's
what I'd like to say.
I think that's it. I think that's a great wrap up of our conversation today, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for tuning in and being my first guest for 2023. I think it's an awesome conversation to start with.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's been a really fun conversation, and I hope it's been valuable for your audience.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you.